All right, we carry on. There we go. Okay, we're in John chapter 9. We're looking at the report of Jesus' healing of the man born blind, and the Pharisees are seeking to discredit that miracle. And with growing frustration, the Pharisees say to the healed man in chapter 9, verse 25, they say in essence, okay, look, let's go over your story again. And growing impatient himself, the healed man, he answers, he said, I've told you already and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? And in response to that, the Pharisees, they hurl insults at this man, and they accuse him of being a disciple of Jesus, and they declare that they are disciples of Moses. They say, in effect, that Moses' credibility as a man of God, that's not in doubt, whereas Jesus is an unknown upstart of uncertain origin who's casting himself as a source of new revelation. And so let's pick back up there with the healed man's response to that. And he uses their confession of ignorance about Jesus' origin to contrast them with Jesus. They can't even work out where Jesus is from. That exceeds their ability. They can't do that, but Jesus gave him the ability to see. And that's quite a contrast. And he then reminds them of the principle in Scripture that God does not listen to the prayers of the wicked, but he attends to the prayers of the righteous, which when coupled with the general Jewish belief that miracles were answers to prayer, that leads to the conclusion that Jesus would not be able to do the unprecedented miracle of bringing sight to a person who had been born blind if he were not of God. As Colin Cruz remarks, he says, applied to Jesus, the blind man's argument was correct, but applied generally to all miracle workers, it could be misleading. False prophets can perform miracles as well, although there's no evidence of their having healed the congenitally blind. So this person calls on a principle they understood about God hearing the prayers of the righteous. He may apply it too broadly, but this person is using it against the Pharisees, and they're claiming that, listen, they're denying this miracle. And he turns this around and he says, well, you can't even figure out your abilities outstripped by finding out where he's from. And he, on the other hand, is able to bring sight to a person who's born blind. And the Pharisees, they don't take kindly to being lectured in theology by the uneducated healed man. They didn't particularly care for that, and so they then acknowledge implicitly that the man had been born blind, right? I mean, the whole time they're saying, is this your son that you allege was born, who you say was born blind, and all this kind of stuff? They're trying to say, listen, this is a setup job. And now they acknowledge implicitly that he was born blind by telling them he was born completely in sin. You see, taking his blindness at birth as proof that either he or his parents had sinned, which was the very claim that Jesus had rejected. And their implicit acknowledgement that he had in fact been born blind, that then leaves them without an explanation. Well, then how did he come to see? Now that you've come around to saying, okay, yes, in fact, he's been born blind. Well, how does he now see? Whereas the blind man has an answer for them. He insists that he was healed by Jesus, but they ignore that problem, as critics often do. They just don't want to think through things. They ignore that problem and simply throw the man out. They cast him out. That could mean simply that they cast him out of their immediate presence in anger, or it could mean that they excommunicated him because he supported Jesus. So when they cast him out, are they just getting rid of him here? Or is it deeper than that, and they cast him out, they excommunicated him from the Jewish fellowship? So it could be either one of those. And then we see in 9:35 to 41, It says, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, 'We see,' your guilt remains." Okay, so Jesus heard the leaders had mistreated the healed man because of his comments about Jesus. So he sought the healed man out, and when he found him at some public place in the city, he asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he's asking this person if he has put his faith in that person he describes as the Son of Man. That is a title that is rooted in the divine human figure, who in the vision in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, is given a kingdom by God. So this idea, when he sits here and refers to him, the Son of Man, that's this divine human figure in Daniel 7, 13 and 14, who's given a kingdom by God. And he asks him, "Have you put your faith in that person?" So presumably now recognizing from Jesus' voice that Jesus was the one who had healed him, the man says respectfully and gratefully, he says, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus then reveals that he, the one who had performed this miraculous healing on him, that he is the Son of Man, that he is this figure from Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14. He reveals that he's the Son of Man, at which time the man confesses his faith and worshiped him. So he understood that the Son of Man is a loaded term. And so when Jesus says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man? Have you believed in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" "I am." And then the man puts his faith in him and he believes in him. And Jesus then articulates a truth that was illustrated in the healing of the blind man. He says that he came into the world for judgment, in the sense that he came as God's criterion of judgment, as the one who functions as the separator of the saved and the condemned based on whether he's received in faith. And a purpose of his coming was that those who are lost, those who do not see the truth of God, that they may come to see it, that they may gain spiritual sight through his revelation of God. So here they are, spiritually blind, they don't see, and he comes that those who don't see may come to see, may have spiritual sight through his revelation of God. And alternatively, those who claim to already see the truth of God, those who are sure that they already have everything wired and there's nothing else that can be brought to them, those who think that they already see that, he said that they already have spiritual sight, he comes that they may in their pride fail to see the truth that he reveals, that they may be blinded to that truth. And that played out, right? It played out in the differing responses of the blind man and the Pharisees. It's exactly what happened. So some of the Pharisees who are near him, they heard his words and they said, "We're not blind too, are we?" Which would be a better way to render that. "We're not blind too, are we?" So they're very defensive about that. They're defensive about any suggestion that they may be spiritually blind, whereas Jesus has just explained that it's those who realize their spiritual blindness who are open to his gift of spiritual sight. If you think you already see, I have no need of the sight you provide, then you blow it off. If you recognize your need, if you recognize that I am spiritually blind, well, then you are open to the gift of sight that he provides. And so that's what he's telling them. You see, as Andrew Lincoln, in his commentary, he says, the blindness Jesus refers to is the kind of blindness that knows it is blindness. Just like the blind man, right? I mean, the blind man saying, what are you talking about? I can see. I don't need anything from you. No, he understood his deficit, his need. And he says, blindness refers to the kind of blindness that knows its blindness, the blindness of the blind man who was ready to obey in order to receive his sight. See, those who insist they already see the truth, they are closed to the gift of spiritual sight. So here is Jesus bringing the gift, and I say, in essence, I already see. I have no need of your gift. You're a joke. Who are you to tell me that I need anything from you? You need something from me. I'm the seer. You're the blind man. And that's not the truth. Right? Jesus is the purveyor, the giver of spiritual sight. And if a person insists, I already see, I do not need something from you, well, then they're going to reject it. Lincoln says again, he says, what the Pharisees are suffering from is in fact an illusion of sight. Because we know they're blind. But you try telling them that. Jesus is telling them that. And how are they reacting to it? Do they sit there and go, you're right. I really am blind? No. They're saying, what are you, crazy? You think I'm blind? I'm the king of the hill, baby. It says here, so what the Pharisees are suffering from is in fact an illusion of sight, and this has caused a far deeper darkness than they're aware of. The darkness of refusing to acknowledge one's blindness and therefore of being unable to accept the light when it is offered. And that's what I think Jesus is telling them, and you just see it played out in the reactions here with the blind man. So Jesus, he tells them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt, but now that you say, we see, your guilt remains. In other words, if they were humble people who recognized that they were in fact blind and thus recognized their need of the spiritual sight that Jesus provides, well, they would then receive Jesus in faith, become his disciples, and would be forgiven. But since they insist that they already see and thus have no need for the sight that Jesus provides, they will not become his disciples, and their guilt remains. So that's what I think he's telling them. It gets confusing, but I think that's what he's telling them. That's the reality he's delivering to them. He's letting them know, he's appealing to them, saying to them, you are, in fact, the reality is you're blind, but you don't know it. Your pride and your arrogance, you insist that you can see, and because of that, you reject the gift of sight that I provide. Whereas someone like the blind man, who in physical sense, you see him, he understands it, well, as an analogy spiritually, he recognizes his need and therefore receives the gift that I offer. So in 10:1-21, kind of a lengthy section, but like I say, I like to keep them together. He says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. Well, that's how they are. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I received from my Father." There was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said, "He has a demon and is insane. Why listen to him?" But others said, "These are not the words of one who's oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" So he's just always causing, you see these people, you got this reactionary blow off, and then you have these other people just going, I don't know, man. There's something about this guy. There's something about him. So Jesus tells this group of Pharisees, he tells them a parable or a figure of speech about a shepherd and his sheep. And he contrasts the thief and the robber to the shepherd. The thief, he enters the sheep pen surreptitiously to remove the sheep, whereas the shepherd, he's welcomed through the front door and he leads the sheep out by the sound of his voice. The sheep respond to their shepherd's voice. They respond to his voice and they follow him out, and they won't follow a stranger. Right? They will not follow a stranger. As the healed blind man, he had responded to Jesus' words, but not those of the Pharisees. Right? You've got these competing appeals. So he follows and trusts and listens to Jesus, but he rejects all of the negativity and the hostility that the Pharisees were pitching, despite the Jewish leaders' best efforts to delegitimize Jesus and to intimidate people, to intimidate them from coming to faith in him. There are those who will recognize Jesus' word as the truth and not be captured by the word of those seeking to mislead them and thereby harm them. And so you see this right here. So here he listens to Jesus. You have these other people who are appealing. He doesn't listen to them. He's not taken in by them. And the Pharisees, not surprisingly, as we see a trend, they missed the point. So Jesus, they don't understand this. So Jesus prevents further teaching, in which he utilizes in this further teaching elements from the parable that he just told, specifically the gate, the shepherd, and the sheep. And he first says that he is the door or the gate of the sheep, meaning he's the true avenue of blessing for them. Right? He is the way to the nourishment of the pasture and to the security of the pen. He's that means of ingress and egress to blessing. So he tells them that he is the gate or the door for the sheep. And the statement when he says, "All who came before me," Right? All who came before me are thieves and robbers. Now that statement can be taken either temporally, all who came before me in time, or it can be taken spatially, all who came before me as in into my presence. Like, you come before the king. Okay? So it can be taken temporally, or it can be taken spatially. And if one infers from the current confrontational circumstance that he means a coming before him with a negative attitude and a hostile purpose, well, then the sense of that, all who come before me, it becomes all who confronted me, right? Or all who came before me to deny or challenge my claims. Well, that then points to the Pharisees. Right? Those whom he already suggested were analogous to thieves and robbers. A point that he then repeats here. So those who came before me, these Pharisees who came after me, who came before me with hostile intent, confrontational attitude, well, they were thieves and robbers. They were thieves and robbers in the sense their desire for the sheep, like for the blind man and for everybody else, in trying to turn them away from Jesus, their desire for the sheep would result in the sheep's harm and destruction. Just like a thief and a robber, when he comes in, he's not looking to bless you. He's not looking for good things. So it's in that sense that they would function as thieves and robbers. But as indicated in the parable, the sheep, those who are humbly and genuinely devoted to God, they're not taken in by them. Those who are humble, genuinely and humbly devoted to God aren't taken in by them. In contrast, anyone who enters by him, anyone who accepts him as the Messiah, he will be saved and will experience blessing expressed in sheep terms, right? In going in and out and finding pasture. So they will be blessed if they wind up receiving him. Now, if one takes the statement temporally, so that was the idea. If you say, listen, I'm taking it when he says here, all who came before me spatially, and in context saying came before me with hostility and confrontational intent, well, that's one thing. I think he's talking about the Pharisees. If he's speaking temporally and saying all who came before me in time, well, then I suspect he's referring to all who came before him with claims to be the Messiah. Okay, as D.A. Carson says in his commentary, he says, the ensuing verses suggest that all who ever came before me excludes from the indictment such leaders as Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others who heard God's voice in former times and who served him faithfully in the terms of the covenant to which they had sworn allegiance. It sounds rather as if reference is being made to messianic pretenders, and there were some, who promised the people freedom, but who lead them into war, suffering, and slavery. So you did have false messiahs, people coming saying, you've been waiting a long time since the fall for God to act ultimately in this world. You've been waiting a long time. I'm the guy, and he was a poser. And people get all riled up, follow him, and they wind up getting crushed and suffering. So either way, if he's speaking spatially, I can tell you how I see it. If he meant it temporally, then that's what I think is going on. And Jesus again contrasts himself to the thief in terms of their purposes for the sheep. The thief, he comes only to harm. He comes to harm the sheep, to steal and kill and destroy. But Jesus came from heaven. He came from heaven that the sheep might have life and might have it to the max, is how we would say. When he says might have it abundantly, might have it to the max. J. Ramsey Michaels, in his commentary, says, this abundant life, that you may have life and have it abundantly. This abundant life is simply a way of speaking of eternal life in the classic Johannine sense of a life that is not merely endless in duration, but new life, a qualitatively different relationship with God. So Jesus comes to provide that in contrast to these a thief and a robber whose interest and motivation is really something to harm the sheep. And Jesus declares that he's the good shepherd. He's the good shepherd, and as such, he lays down his life for the sheep. Now, this is a clear allusion to his coming sacrifice, right? He lays down his life for the sheep. And in contrast, the Jewish leaders who are opposing him are doing everything they can to get people not to embrace him, not to put their faith in him, not to follow him. They're opposing him. They're like the hired hand who doesn't own the sheep. That's what they're like. See, he's in it for, the hired hand is in it for self-interest. He's not invested in the sheep. He's in it for self-interest, not because he cares about the sheep. So he's quick to abandon the sheep when danger threatens. What does he care? It's like the difference between an owner of a business and an employee. Right? The owner sits here and says, I really care about this stuff. The employee said, not mine. What do I care if the customers hate this place? Right? So it's that same concept. So that's what they're so they flee. They don't care when danger threatens. And that's like those Jewish leaders. They were not protecting the people from the devastating effect of Satan's lie that Jesus is not the Messiah. You want to talk about the big lie? That's the big lie. And they're not doing anything to protect the people from that ravenous wolf, from that lie. They're not doing anything. On the contrary, they were instruments of that lie. They were being used to further that lie, working to aid the ravenous wolf by turning the people's hearts and minds from that truth, threatening anyone who would look in the Lord's direction. If you're coming and you're saying, wait, wow, this is, what? What do you say about this? And what about, you see, I'm looking over, hey! See, you see who they're working for, right? They're just like that. They're working against you. They're trying to have you destroyed. And they're trying, so any who are turning to him, they wind up treating that way. So they just get put like that. All right, Jesus repeats here. He repeats that he's the good shepherd. And then he speaks of a mutual knowing that exists between him and his own, which is analogous to the mutual knowing, the intimate personal relationship between the Father and him. Jesus knows what's in all people, right? He's demonstrated that, exhibited that. John says that. He knows what is in all people. And those Jews in whom the Father's word is abiding, as he says in John 5:38, those Jews who believed Moses, as he says in 5:46, those who had heard and learned from the Father, he says in 6:45, those who truly had God as their Father, as he says in 8:42, those who were Abraham's children in the faith sense, as he says in 8:39 and 40, well, those people among the Jews, they recognized and accepted Jesus for who he is. They saw that. They were tuned to him. You see, through God's work in their lives, they were open, they were ready, he had prepared them, they were tuned to Jesus. And so they recognized him and they responded to his word. And through discipleship, they related to Jesus with increasing intimacy, all of which is divinely foreknown. Okay, all of which is divinely foreknown. Who are among this group of people those who have listened to my voice through the years and ages and opened their hearts and been prepared so that they are now tuned? So when Jesus comes and says, I'm the one, They hear it. As opposed to those who have taken what I've said, my efforts to soften them, my efforts to open them up, and just created their own thing, rejected that and built their own little world. So you have this difference between them. And Jesus says again that he lays down his life for the sheep. And then he speaks of other sheep that are not of this fold that he also must bring. Okay, so here he is out ministering among Jewish people. And then he says there are other sheep who are not of this fold that he also must bring. And Colin Cruz, in his commentary, he says, the allusion is to Gentile people. I think that's right. The allusion is to Gentile people, those who are not part of Israel. Of these, Jesus said, they too will listen to my voice, and there shall be, literally, they shall become one flock and one shepherd. Jesus was foreshadowing apostolic times when his gospel would be taken to non-Jews, to Samaritans and Gentiles, something that would take place through the preaching of his disciples. Then all peoples would hear his voice, believe in him, and be incorporated into the body of his disciples. Believers from different races would become one flock, a church made up of Jews, Samaritans, and Gentiles, led by one shepherd, Jesus himself. So Jesus is dropping this, that there are in fact those who relate to me, those who are part of my flock, it's not only going to be you Jewish people to whom I've come, but it's going to be bigger and broader than that. And so I think that's what he's talking about. And the Father loves Jesus because of who he is. He loves him because of who he is, the perfectly faithful and obedient Son, as exemplified supremely in his laying down his life and taking it back up, by his dying and rising from the dead in accordance with the Father's will. Now, C.K. Barrett, in his commentary, he says, the relation between the Father and the Son is essential and eternal. In the Trinity, you see. The relationship of the Father and the Son is essential and eternal. John does not mean that the Father loved Christ because the crucifixion took place, but the love of the Father for the Son is a love that is eternally linked with and mutually dependent upon the Son's complete alignment with the Father's will and his obedience even unto death. So he loves him. It is an inherent part of their relationship. This is how they are, but they are so tuned together. They are so aligned in will. And that's what Jesus is exemplifying completely in his laying down his life and his taking it back up. He doesn't. Now, Jesus speaks of his active role in laying down his life and taking it back up. Right? He says that no one takes his life from him, right? You think anybody's going to come up if the Lord Jesus isn't allowing something to happen, that somebody's going to come in and just pummel him and do what? No. See? So he says no one takes his life, no one takes his life from him. Rather, he allows sinful human beings to put him to death. Right? If somebody's killing me, I got no say in it. I'd be kicking and screaming and doing everything I could. I'd be fighting. Part of the majesty of the Lord is that he could stop all this. I don't have the power to do it. They just grab me, knock me out, and nail me to the cross. But he has the power to stop it, and he yields to it. Now, why does he do that? It's because he loves you. Right? He loves me. That's why when people talk about God the way they talk about him, and they caricature God as this human-hating, it's just shameful to me. It's blasphemous to talk about God that way when you see the depth of his love. And then to act and speak of him like, oh, he's a hateful person. You know, people like Dawkins and these people, oh. It's just crazy to me. So you have Jesus here, he has the authority. He has the authority to do so. He allows people to take his life. He has the authority to do so, and also the authority to take his life back up by virtue of the command that he received from his Father to do so. All right, so here we see Jesus, by God's authority, that he was in some way active in his own resurrection. And the texts that speak of him having been raised by the Father, having been raised by God, they refer to God's active role in that. So Jesus is doing something in his resurrection by virtue of the command, or what God has said to him, the instruction from the Father. And the Father is also active in that, and perhaps also active through his authorization of Jesus' role in the resurrection. But you see, like with everything, Father and Son working in unity, working as one, together in this. So Jesus is active in the resurrection, the Father is active. And the Jews are again divided because of Jesus' words. Right? Many of them, they just blow him off as the insane ramblings of a demon-possessed person. They're just like, now that shows you something. What's happened? What's happened to these people who treat the words of Jesus, the Word incarnate, that you and I know for a fact this is God coming here, speaking to people, and how's he received? You've got a group of people just, he's crazy. Well, what happened to them? How did they wind up getting molded through their suppression of God's work in their lives? Whereas we have other people who are sitting here, the Jews, who say, oh, wow. You see? And so this is the division. You have this division. Or some who are saying, look, he's demon possessed. But you've got other people who are saying, listen here, that shoe doesn't fit. You're saying, no, this is just the ramblings of a crazy man. Why are you even listening to this guy? And they're going, no, I can't write him off that way. You know, some of the things he says, listen, they're hard to grasp. I get that. I don't fully get what he's saying. But there was a coherence and a profundity in what they could understand that made them doubt that charge. Or they're saying, no, this isn't right. He says, these are not the words of one who's oppressed by a demon. I don't care what you're saying. I don't care how you're trying to characterize him. That's a no sale for me. You see, I don't understand everything, but what I do understand, there's something afoot, people. There's something going on with this guy. And says there, and then besides what he does, can a demon open the eyes of the blind? All right, so 22 to 42. At that time, the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, tell us plainly. Jesus answered them, I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me, but you do not believe because you're not among my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. The Jews picked up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, I've shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? The Jews answered him, it's not for a good work that we're going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said you are gods? If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and Scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you're blaspheming because I said I'm the Son of God? If I am not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father." Again they sought to arrest him, but he escaped from their hands. He went away again across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing at first, and there he remained. And many came to him, and they said, "John did no sign, but everything that John said about this man was true," and many believed in him there. I heard that bell. I don't like that bell, but I've learned to live under the dominion of that bell. All right, so at the Feast of Dedication, or we call it Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication or Hanukkah, which was observed in November or December, a month or so after the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths, which was in September, October, Jesus is walking in the Colonnade of Solomon on the east side of the temple precincts. And Hanukkah, as you may know, that marked the rededication of the Jewish temple in 164 BC, after the Maccabean revolt, against the Seleucid ruler Antiochus Epiphanes IV, which was triggered by the sacrifice of a pig on the temple altar 3 years earlier. I don't know how much you remember, but after Alexander the Great sweeps over in, say, 333, when Alexander the Great comes in around that time, and he rapidly has his great conquests. That's why the New Testament is written in Greek, by the way, because Alexander spreads Greek culture all over. And so after he dies, you have 4 generals who take over from him, and you have 2 of them. You have the Seleucid line and the Ptolemies down in Egypt. And so they often vied for who's going to control Palestine. And the Seleucids in the 2nd century at this time were controlling Palestine, and you had a crazed ruler there. There are a lot of things that went into this, but he winds up very hostile to the Jews. And so he winds up basically sticking it in their eye, and he sacrifices a pig there. Well, that caused a tremendous revolt known as the Maccabean Revolt. And so when the Maccabees succeeded, they then cleansed the temple from that defilement. And that's what this Hanukkah celebration is. So having said all that, Lord willing, next week we'll carry on then. In 2 weeks, Meg and I are going to go to Searcy to visit our grandson at Harding. Looking forward to that. So Scott Van Wormer has agreed to fill in for me in 2 weeks. So that'll be good. Scott will do a great job. All right, thanks.